As we get into today's lesson, The Interior Designer, let's take a look at some of the objectives and learning outcomes for this lesson. We start off by understanding an interior designer's role within the interior design industry. We understand the roles and responsibility of a designer and being able to implement them. We develop our key knowledge in influential designers, and last but not least, we solidify the understanding on how to start your project with a client. That leads us very nicely into our next lesson of the client. So now that you're all caught up, let's dive right into our lesson. Who is the interior designer? By now, you should all have some sort of an idea of what we do as interior designers. But do you know what our roles and responsibilities are? It's important to understand what will be expected from you as an interior designer when it comes to your client, your job, or even the company you work for. So, what is an interior designer? Let's do a little bit of a recap. Most of you should be able to answer this question by now. So, for those of you who are struggling, an interior designer is someone who applies the design principles and elements to the built environment to improve the functionality and aesthetics within a space. As interior designers, we do this through the use of furniture placement, structural placement, color palette, space planning, and functional decor. From living rooms that are beautiful yet functional to offices that people want to love and work in. Elements such as artworks, lighting, electrical fixtures, window treatments, and floorings must all work together to contribute to an overall look and feel that will satisfy your client's needs. The purpose of interior design is to help grow the functionality and quality of your interior spaces. We do this by combining creativity with our technical elements. Interior design can be broken up into sectors. Do any of you know what these sectors are? Pop your answers into your Morpheus text box. Do any of you know what the design sectors include? Let's take a look. Firstly, we have domestic design, residential design, commercial design, and your hospitality design. Each of these sectors have really unique and exciting aspects to them, which we will look at a little bit later towards the end of your module. Whichever design sector you decide to go into, there are roles and responsibilities for designers that remain consistent throughout. Some of the typical characteristics of an interior designer are: designers are generally organized people. They usually have great attention to detail. In terms of technical skills, these designers have the ability to make calculations and are proficient in design software applications. As designers, we need to be able to have good material selection skills. We are responsible for selecting the best material and best product suitable for the projects. We also need to have a know-how on how to mix texture, color, lighting, and other factors to combine an interactive, well-designed space. The projects that you may be required to work on can range from a simple home environment to shopping malls, hotel lobbies, and luxury living environments. The spaces and interiors can be varied, and therefore as a designer, you may choose to work on or in a specific category in a specific design sector. Can you remember the design sectors that we've just spoken about? Let's do a recap. These sectors may include domestic design sectors, your retail design sector, hospitality, or commercial design sector. No matter which design sector or what size project you're working on, there are common threads that a designer is responsible for. Can any of you think what they could be? Let's take a look at the rules that a designer should follow for any given project. Firstly, we need to ensure that the space or interior is attractive. We need to ensure that it's a safe space and practice functional design. The design needs to meet the client's expectation as well as meet the needs of the client and the client's objectives. Let's make sure that we're following by looking at an example. Ryan is a client with a new apartment and he's just made contact with us. Ryan has a home in the desert and would like to make some functional changes to his home as it's attracting way too much heat. You as the designer have been tasked to revamp his apartment. The primary focus of this revamp is to ensure that the apartment is cool and allows for airflow. He has requested that we start off by making a change to his floor finish. Your flooring options are a light carpeted floor or a tiled floor. Which option would you advise your client in going with? Leave your comments in your Morpheus text box. So your option is A, to carpet every room, or B, to tile every room. The correct answer here would be option B, to tile or use a cooler flooring material, something that doesn't retain heat and won't hold onto the sandy and dusty pieces as a carpet would. As we know, our client Ryan has asked us to ensure that his home is cool and airy. It is your responsibility, or the responsibility of the designer, to research the climate pertaining to your project to ensure that the correct material has been applied to the space. Have we met the standard rules for any design project? Think back at the rules that we've covered and see if we are in line with our rules and responsibilities. Let's take a look. We are supposed to create an attractive space. To create an attractive space, we would need to ensure that we are choosing an attractive floor finish. Are we creating a safe space? We need to make sure that the tile is slip resistant in areas that may attract damp or moisture. We need to meet the client's needs. Have we done this? Yes, we've done this as we've cooled down his space, and that was his primary need. Next, we look at meeting the client's expectation. What was the client's expectation? It was for us to follow his brief in creating a cooler environment. By using a tiled finish, we've achieved his expectation. And lastly, but most importantly, we need to create a functional design. We need to ensure that the tile that we've chosen is functional within the space, which is what we've done. The main function was to cool the space, and we have achieved this. We can safely say that we have checked all our rule boxes. There's obviously a lot that needs to be considered in a renovation of any home, or this home in particular. But right off the bat, we would ensure that we've checked off the main issues with the space, which was to cool down the home. Check, we have completed our task. Let's take a look at what clients or what projects you could find yourself working on as an interior designer. As an interior designer, your client range can be vast and wide. So you could find yourself working with a client in the domestic sector who has asked you to redesign a bathroom, a living room, or a kitchen space, right through to a large corporation where you need to redesign and space plan an entire office floor, right through to a boutique retailer who needs their store branding to harmonize with their store interior. Something that I find really exciting about this line of work is that it is so incredibly flexible. An interior designer typically works on an internal space or internal environment, but is often required to work closely with an architect to ensure that these exterior spaces and interior spaces work harmoniously. As an interior designer and on your own design projects, it's common to be expected to work with an architect. So why do you think interior designers and architects need to work together? It is to create harmony between interior and exterior spaces. There is a big misconception that designers and architects do not work together, but this is very far from the truth. Can anyone tell me why it is important for designers and architects to work in harmony, and therefore why it would be important for the exterior of a building to work in harmony with the interior of a building? Pop your answers into your Morpheus text box. Why is it important that designers and architects work together? So the answer you're looking for is the reason we need to work in harmony with architects is that the exterior and interior of homes or building environments need to flow seamlessly. The first step towards a successful project or project design is continuity. Harmony and continuity between exterior architecture and interior spaces creates special design in its own. The importance of this idea cannot be overstated. When done well, it creates an atmosphere reflecting the lifestyle and personality of the homeowner or your client. The spaces where we live, eat, and sleep impact us on many levels, but primarily the emotional level. We may not understand why it's uncomfortable, but we emotionally register that something may not be right with the space. A lack of continuity is often to blame for the emotional response. The role of the architect and how they function on a project we tackle in a little bit more detail in your lesson 3. For the meantime, we're building an understanding of how we work together. Now we have the basics. Let's take our journey as interior designers just a little bit further. Great interior design enriches the quality of our lives. It takes a talented team of homeowners, architects, builders, subcontractors, and designers to create a great design. And ideally, a close working relationship begins really early on in a project. Next, we look at your interior design reputation as we look at some of the work scenarios you may find yourself in as interior designers. As an interior designer, you can be an independent contractor or a freelance contractor, where you would need to build up your own client base. Or as an interior designer, you may work for an interior design firm or large corporate. In either case, it's important to excel in order to build up a positive reputation in your industry and secure future work. The interior design industry is built around reputation and largely on word of mouth. So let me ask you a question. Would you employ a designer if you knew that your family member had used them and had a brilliant experience with them? Or would you employ a designer that has told you so much about all the amazing work they have worked on? I know that me and many of my clients would prefer to go with a designer that they're able to see in reality what they've created, as well as first-hand referencing describing the quality of their work. This is why it's important to ensure that you impress your client with all your well-designed spaces and great references through your reputation in the design sector. So by now we should have a rough idea of what we do as interior designers through our design theory. We need to look at the roles and responsibilities that are imperative to carrying out the role of an interior designer. A good place to start is what are employers expecting interior designers to do within their interior design roles. Let's take a look at a job description. Here's a standard employer's advert for an interior designer. We are looking for an artistic, detail-orientated candidate with good interpersonal skills for the position of our interior design firm. The interior designer's key responsibilities are to include visualizing, sketching design plans, producing and procuring materials, determining costs, inspecting construction to ensure alignment with the design specifications have been met, and you will also be expected to comply with regulatory, environmental, and building codes. So, having heard that description, can you pick up some of the key characteristics this employer is looking for in an interior design role? You can pop your answers in your Morpheus text box, or you can have a little think to yourself. What are the key characteristics this interior design role is looking for? In summary, the employer is looking for the following: an artistic, detail-orientated candidate. Artistic in the sense of being creative within your designs. This allows the designer to think out of the box and see their work in a critical manner, which allows us to constantly keep improving on our work. They are also looking for good interpersonal skills. It's so important to be able to communicate as a designer, not only through drawings, but with your client and contractors and anyone in your project team. Next, they are looking for someone to be able to visualize through sketching and design plans. Sketching, as we have learned, is a tool to communicate the vision to our client and the vision to anyone on our project. Next, they're looking for someone to be able to source products and materials. We need to be able to find materials that are pertinent to the project and that suit the budget. The designer would also need to be able to determine costs and inspect the construction site. They would also need to ensure alignment with the design and that the specifications on a project have been met. And very importantly, the designer is required to comply with the regulatory, environmental, and building codes. So that would be very specific to what city, what region, what country you might be working in, but there are a set of rules and regulations that designers and architects need to follow when carrying out a project. And those are quite easily referenced back to the city and town that you may be working from. These regulations and codes you can obtain from your municipality or council within your region. Good interior designers are able to think creatively about the use of space, color, and movement, and will draw on other artistic mediums for creative inspiration. They will be effective communicators with the ability to persuade a client by communicating any design idea. So each company or design role may differ slightly, but there is a standard set of roles and responsibilities that a professional designer should always be ready to do. Here are some of the roles and responsibilities that you as a designer need to have. Firstly, a designer needs to be able to bid on new potential projects. It is the designer's responsibility to outline the client's design objectives and client goals. A key responsibility is to be able to space plan and visualize how the space will be used. The designer is responsible for conceptualizing the project. He or she would need to determine the project cost. A designer needs to set and gauge a project timeline. They will also need to be able to source materials. As the designer, we would be responsible for procurement, so placing orders for furniture or materials. We would be responsible for creating mood boards and sample boards based on the project and the project guidelines. Another one of our responsibilities is drawing development, utilizing computer applications in our design process. And another fun responsibility is coordinating the project with our contractors, as well as overseeing the project and on-site coordination. Ensuring the client is satisfied after completing the project is our number one goal. So all of these responsibilities will lead to our client satisfaction. Let's take a look at each of the responsibility points in a little bit more detail. Firstly, as designers, we are responsible for bidding on new potential projects. This may not be the role in every project or every design firm, but definitely something to be able to check off your list. It could make you more marketable. To bid on a project is to be able to competitively put a quote and design plans together based on the project brief in order to receive the bid or the project go-ahead for you as a freelance designer or for your company. You may go against other design teams, and this is why you need to put your best foot forward. You also need to have done all your research on the project to ensure that you know what documentation is required for each bid. The second responsibility is to outline the client's design objectives and client goals. To be able to outline the design objectives and client's goals is to understand what the client wants and document it accordingly. It would be done during your client briefing stage, which we're going to look at our next lesson. Space planning and visualizing how space will be used is our next responsibility. As a designer, your number one priority is to be able to visualize your client's brief and needs within the space, and to be able to visualize the possibilities within that space by space planning. As a more senior interior designer, you may even be required to do this while standing on site with your client. To plan the space around the primary functions and needs that need to occur within the environment is highly important. Developing this skill will develop you as an interior designer. We do cover space planning in your Module 4 in so much more detail, as you will become masters in space planning. Space planning can be therapeutic for designers, much like putting a puzzle piece together. One of my favorite parts of interior design is definitely the space planning sector, and you guys will come to understand this as we get into Module 4. Next, our responsibility is to conceptualize and sketch design plans. Tying in with your space planning and visualization, it would be your responsibility to bring the design brief to life through the conceptual development process. So what does it mean to conceptualize? This is the development of philosophy and concepts which lead to a concrete idea. This is a process of inventing and creating ideas and explanations which you formulated in your mind, and then you convert them onto a presentation or visual format. Next, as designers, we need to be able to determine costs. It's the designer's responsibility to determine the cost of the completion and the project requirements in the budgeting phase. It's the role of the interior designer to be able to document and project the budget, to ensure that it is in line with the client's budget and that it incorporates all of the client's expectations and needs. So, for example, with Ryan's desert apartment renovation, we need to ensure that we know what Ryan's budget was. We need to ensure that we have included all the material and elements that we need to get the project to completion. If we didn't include an amount for contractors to remove the existing floor finish and replace with new, we would not be doing our job correctly. The designer is also in charge of creating a project timeline. As designers, we would be in charge of drawing up the design as well as the proposed project completion timeline. This is where we let the client know when each part of the process will take place and how long each element in the process is proposed to take. This is not only for the sake of the client, but for the benefit of the designer too. It's a very important responsibility, as it will have a direct impact on the way the client interacts within the space and may even have an impact on the budget. So when providing Ryan his timeline, we detail items such as when the floor will be removed and when the new floor will come in. We would also indicate how long each activity would take. The client may decide to move out of his home during the time and rent another space. This will have a cost implication and could affect your budget. We look at the project timeline in Phase 4 in more detail. This is such an important factor when planning your project. We'll get to this towards the end of this module. The designer's next responsibility is to source material and products which are included on your plans. This simply means that the designer is responsible for tracking down the materials that they are proposing for that particular project. We not only specify the materials that need to be used on the project, but we can also be expected to find these materials from our list of suppliers or even from new suppliers. It is important to ensure that you are always getting the best prices here for your client as well as for your budget. A handy tip here, it's worthwhile building up a list of suppliers that you work well with and that are willing to assist you when in need. This will not only reduce the time spent on your research, but also allow you more design time. Next, the designer would be responsible for placing any orders that pertain to the project. This is a large part of what we as designers do on a daily basis, and sometimes can require finesse and focus. This is a simple placing order scenario. For example, you would place orders for furniture, materials that you've sourced. You would also place orders for any items that you've spec'd for your project. All of these items would definitely need your client to have signed them off before going ahead. Make sure that you have had everything on your list signed off. I mean everything. Everything needs to be signed off by your client or your senior designer. This is to avoid any errors or any time lost during the process. A really fun responsibility, and for me, a very therapeutic session, is to create a mood board and sample board. This is all in the presentation phase of your design project. A mood board is where you collect and display all of your project ideas in the form of a collage, and your sample board is a group display of the samples that you have allocated to your project. You would then use these to present to your client for their feedback and review. A very practical and exciting role as an interior designer. Sourcing all your samples and presenting them is a very creative way to ensure that your client buys into your idea. So when it comes to Ryan's project, we could collect all the flooring and color samples that we've got proposed for his apartment and digitally or manually create a sample or mood board showcasing these samples. We are going to be creating our very own sample and mood boards in Module 3. Very exciting lesson, so don't miss it. The responsibility to create and use computer-aided applications in the design process is part of our responsibility as a designer. Nowadays, a lot of what we as designers do is on computer. We can use programs such as SketchUp, AutoCAD, Revit, Atlantis, and many more to create our drawings and presentations for our clients' use. Coordinating with contractors and other professionals such as electricians, painters, plumbers is another really important responsibility. Whether you run a large corporation or work as a freelance professional, there will be instances where you just can't provide everything that your client requires. For example, your client may need an electrical distribution board relocated on a project. You will most likely need to subcontract out the job to an electrical professional. And this concept extends to all areas within your project, such as architecture, engineering work, artists, etc. Please don't be scared to get other people involved in your projects. It's often what can make or break a project. Next, we are tasked with inspecting the design after the completion to determine whether the client goals have been met and whether our design goals have been met. It is the designer's responsibility to ensure that all the construction and shop fitting work that was detailed by us has been carried out in accordance with guidelines that we have indicated on our project and on our drawings. This is done in the form of an on-site inspection by the designer and any teams that took part in that project. So, after Ryan's floor had been installed, you as the designer would set up a meeting with your flooring installer to ensure that everything was implemented as neatly and correctly as possible. Ensuring the client is satisfied after the project is complete. This goes back to everything that we do as designers. The client is the person that we are here to please. We need to ensure that they have as little stress and as little work to do as possible with these projects. It is our responsibility to take them from something that they aren't happy with or an issue that they may have had on a project to something that they didn't believe was even achievable. We have now looked at a full skill set that is required of an interior designer. Once you have the skill set, you can officially call yourself an interior designer. But don't worry, that is why you and I are on this journey. We are starting from the beginning, and by the end of this course, you will have all of these skills in your interior design basket. Let's take a quick sneak peek into our lesson 2 and what you can expect in your lesson 2 as we meet our client. We start off by working on our very first project with our very own clients. We learn all about how to take our client brief. So I really love meeting with clients, and I'm sure that you are going to love it just as much as I do. But as I just said, that was just a sneak peek. Let's get back to the fundamentals of what we are expected as interior designers before we meet our client. On your design journey as interior designers, it's important to look at some of the most influential interior designers to date and how they have successfully created work with very specific characteristics. The following designers are a handful of the most influential designers that have pioneered the design world as we know it today. And some of these designers include J. Spector, Arthur Elrod, Ziyech and Cullinan, and last but not least, our Karen Bourne. Our first designer, J. Spector, was famous for his luxurious modernism with a hint of Art Deco interiors. J. Spector was around from 1929 to 1999, and a famous saying that he used to say during this time was, in the 20th century, Art Deco had been the greatest design element. It's our heritage and my inspiration, and this was very clear in his interiors. It's important to look at some of the characteristics of all of these designers' work. Let's start with J. Spector. His work was generally bold with Asian and African influences. He created a lot of his own furniture pieces, such as sleek sofa chairs with dramatic channels and quilting. He created a lot of his own furniture pieces, such as sleek sofas and chairs with dramatic channels and quilting details. He used a lot of dramatic interior imagery, as you can see in this picture example. Can you see the African influence and the Asian influences coming through here? I can also see a lot of the strong, bold colored elements in his interiors. The next designer we look at is Arthur Elrod, who was around from 1924 to 1974. He was known for putting the groove into Southern California by outfitting swinging glass-walled villas for Walt Disney and other famous Hollywood stars. His own Palm Spring residence was designed with architect John Luthner, which is shown in this image on your screen. It was also shown in the issue of House and Garden in 1969. This interior was also featured on the James Bond film Diamonds Are Forever in 1971. Some of the characteristics of his work include succulent use of colorful interiors, indoor rock piles and beds of tropical plants, and a lot of his interior was furnished with graphic contemporary art. The next duo we look at is Ziyech and Cullinan. They were both partners in life and partners in business. They joined forces in 1966 and were called, amongst other names, the most original designers of their generation. The design duo became design world darlings in the late 1960s, when their work appeared almost consistently on the covers of American Shelter magazine. What made their work so popular at the time? It was the designer's enthusiasm for zesty color and bold patterns. Let's take a look at some of the characteristics of their interiors. Firstly, we see a lot of use of bold color. They are very complex and intricate interiors and used multi-patterned textured elements, creating a feeling of fully contemporary in spirit. One could even give the term to their work slightly saucy. An amazing interior designer to have a closer look at is Karen Bourne. Karen Bourne is a designer that I have been following and looking into for quite a while now. Her story stands as an inspiration for those trying to navigate the world of interior design in this time of the digital age. Her confidence is so apparent and clear through all of her work. Karen believes in evoking a unique soul into every project. Each space is designed with an intention, and her distinct aesthetic is an eclectic, bold, visually exciting, and timeless space. This is one designer to keep an eye on. I definitely do. You can follow her on Instagram, on Facebook, and she's recently put out a new TV series. Go give it a look. We have now covered what the role of an interior designer is and looked at some of the influential designers that have put these roles and responsibilities to practice. Knowing the roles and responsibilities to the design process is key to mastering a design interview or an interior design job, or even just for planning your very own interior design project. With these roles and responsibilities, we're able to put together and execute brilliant and seamless design projects. The next step is putting your first project into play. Do you remember that we covered our project timeline in Module 1? Can any of you remember what our first step was? Pop your answers into Morpheus text box. Can any of you remember what our first step was? Before we end off today's lesson, let's take a look at where we begin and how we start our first project, because the next lesson is all about our first step in our timeline. How do we develop or start our first project? So as we know, in our Module 1, we looked at a high level of a project timeline with all of these steps that need to be included in your project timeline. Do you remember which ones we looked at? We started off with our phase 1, which was obtaining our project brief. We then know that phase 2 is our schematic design, where we gather up all of our relevant information in the form of a site survey. Our phase 3 was our conceptual design development sector, where we started conceptualizing our project. Phase 4 was our construction documentation phase, and this is where a lot of our computer-aided software comes into play. Phase 5 was our construction and maintenance phase, and our phase 6 was our construction and administration phase. Now that we've recapped our project timeline, you are finally ready for lesson 2 of Module 2, the client. This is where we tackle the brief and how to create your very own brief for your first project. We're going to break that up and look at how you would begin this project and implement these phases into your very own project with your very own client. Very exciting, guys. Can't wait to get to lesson 2.